The rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in August was never just about the preservation of a Confederate statue. The defiant display of symbols, a tiki torch parade, they were meant to intimidate. All of it combined to speak to America not reverently about its past, but menacingly about the future, and to speak about it like this.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets!
Clearly, some wanted to provoke a violent backlash. Then, in one horrific flash, it all backfired. In what some called an act of terror, a 32-year-old woman was killed. Police arrested a white nationalist and charged him with murder.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
The president's on many sides, even-handedness seemed to misunderstand the moment, as though the bigots and racists really were no worse than those who opposed racism and bigotry. A couple of days later, he unequivocally called out the racists and other hate groups as repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. But then he switched back again.
I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
He condemned the white supremacists, but spoke of the symbols of white supremacy as equivalent to the monuments to the founders of the nation, Jefferson and Washington. Would those monuments now have to come down too, he asked?
Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly.
What Trump and white supremacists have in common is that both are trying to exploit the anxiety of white Americans, trying to encourage white identity politics. Now, normally when we talk about identity politics, we mean the politics of the left or the politics of minorities. But white identity politics has always been available for exploitation in the political mainstream. It's just that until Trump, mainstream politicians didn't go there. Or if they did, they pretended they were doing something else.
Governor Bush, a few blocks from here, on top of the state capitol building, the Confederate flag flies with the state flag and the U.S. flag.
In the past, Republicans have found ways to tiptoe around awkward questions about the supporters of the Confederacy and their base.
The question is, does the flag offend you personally?
As an American citizen, I trust the people of South Carolina to make the decision for South Carolina.
But that's not Trump's style. He bluntly tells his supporters that there is a conspiracy to rob them of their heritage, and that the mainstream media are behind it.
It's time to expose the crooked media deceptions and to challenge the media for their role in fomenting divisions. And yes, by the way, they are trying to take away our history and our heritage. You see that.
Our history and our heritage. That language is offensive to people who don't feel included by it, but it's effective in rallying those who believe in zero-sum politics, that someone's gain is always someone else's loss.
He was trying to make it clear that he was defending the people who wanted to oppose efforts to remove Confederate monuments. He was defending those people because that's actually a relatively popular position in this country.
Vincent Hutchings, who teaches political science at the University of Michigan, has built much of his career on understanding how politicians talk about race in America. When Trump said that the protests in defense of the statue in Charlottesville included many fine people, he didn't mean neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan, but he certainly meant sympathizers of the white supremacist Confederacy. And that wasn't cost-free.
I think that it may undermine the Republican strategy of linking themselves with groups that flirted with intolerance. The Republican Party has been doing this for years, and it's worth noting that prior to the Republican Party, the Democratic Party had been doing this. But even as both of these parties engaged in such political actions, they've tried to deny that that's what they were doing. Charlottesville makes that harder to do because we now have a Republican president who is at least embracing some elements of racial intolerance in terms of the implicit message associated with the Confederate sympathizers.
So help you God?
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
That this is happening after 8 years of the first African-American president seems unlikely to be just a coincidence.
With the election of Barack Obama in 2008, breaking along, well, a tradition that goes back to George Washington of white male presidents, a large fraction of Americans were disturbed by that outcome, were upset by that outcome, were challenged by that outcome. And this previously latent white identity was made, well, not latent anymore.
There's truth to that, but there's also more to it. On the other side of the Atlantic, white identity politics is also finding new salience. The changing face of urban Britain had something to do with the unexpected result of the Brexit vote to take Britain out of the European Union and try to seal it off from the currents of change in Europe. There were similar strains in the support for Donald Trump and the support for Brexit, things captured in the title of Justin Guest's new book, The New Minority: White Working Class Politics in an Age of Immigration and Inequality.
It's a wild idea to consider white people a minority in contemporary society, and yet that is precisely what so many of the people I spoke to describe themselves as. They believe that white people are becoming a minority, disempowered in the country that they once defined. And I heard it over and over in different contexts, both in the United States and in the United Kingdom.
It's this white minority consciousness that Guest's book describes as a transatlantic phenomenon.
What we are seeing now is a transcontinental, a transatlantic politics of populism. But the populism is really derived in similar ways from otherwise very different circumstances. The number one factor is demographic change. So white working class people in both the United States and in Europe are reacting to, responding to transformative demographic change in the neighborhoods and counties where they live.
Guest asks us to imagine Trump's campaign based on the slogan, "Make America Great," instead of "Make America Great Again."
And we will make America great again.
It's a different message. "Make America Great Again" conjures a time when America was a better place for white people, not for people of color or Hispanics.
I think what's happened now is Donald Trump, from his place on the bully pulpit, has been able to awaken a sense of white consciousness, a sense that white people are in this together amongst people who may not have otherwise thought that way. And we're seeing this in a variety of metrics in polling research that shows that white people are more aware of their sense of community, whereas before that really was much harder to define.
John Sides of George Washington University, together with a couple of other political scientists, is about to release a study of 2016 election data that challenges the popular belief that demographic changes in America mean that what's sometimes called the Obama coalition of blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and college-educated whites is inevitably a winning coalition.
So again, I cautioned in 2012 not to overinterpret the election outcome as suggesting that Democrats had it made in these national elections. And I think 2016 shows you why you have to be cautious about that. We have to be careful, assuming that the Obama coalition is the ascendant coalition for the next generation of American politics.
The success of Trump's overt appeal to white racial anxiety during the election and his continued signaling to a white sense of victimhood has taken politics in a direction others have been reluctant to follow before.
Well, I think that the big question for the Republican Party in particular is what lesson you learn from Trump's victory. Is this is his type of message or campaign the way that you win? I mean, electoral incentives are one thing, and those are powerful. But I think where you've seen Republicans draw the line time and time again is that Trump goes further than they're willing to go, and some electoral defeats beginning in 2018, right, would start to make them cautious about emulating his style of campaigning.
Trump's approval rating is at an historic low for a president so early in his term. There are serious doubts about his competence, his ability to comprehend policy, let alone manage it, his understanding of the world. Those weaknesses make it harder to see how much the disapproval of Trump is a consequence of his substance and how much is only a consequence of his style.
You saw that in the wake of Charlottesville. I mean, there's lots of Republicans, many of whom won't go on the record, but they're clearly very, very, very dismayed by Trump's reaction to that. So that raises the question, right? Are they going to embrace white identity politics, but just in a somewhat politer fashion, or do they want to continue to build a message that they think of as being perhaps more broadly appealing? And the question would be, as of 2018, going into 2019, they'll have to make a decision about that, in part because they have to decide, meaning people in the party, have to decide whether to challenge Trump for the nomination or try to otherwise usher him off the stage, where which he might not go gently.
We don't believe in racism at all.
The battle over Confederate monuments continues.
Racists go home! Racists go home!
This is Richmond, Virginia, a couple of weeks ago. Those who wanted to see the statues go vastly outnumbered those who wanted to protect them. But the fringier groups of the American right, such as these advocates for a new Confederate States of America, have probably never felt so close to the mainstream of politics as they do now that Trump is their president.
In honor of veterans. Correct. No matter what war they fought. U.S. veterans. American veterans. No matter what war they fought. That is exactly like going into
the great-grandmother's headstone and kicking it over.
But they're not wrong to believe that, at least for the moment, white identity as a political force is rising.
We will make America great again.
Keith Bogue, CBC News, Washington.